Hey guys, what is going on? It is, as you probably have ascertained by this point, it is Brook, also known as the Undead DM. I'm back at it again, in the car, for you today, with another little discussion I'd like to have with you. Just like to say, before we get into this, make sure to leave a like on this video if you agree, disagree, comment what you agree and what you don't agree on. Subscribe. Just hit that little button. You'll have every notification you need to. But with that, let's just get started. So, I was watching a fellow YouTuber's video, Saibrock Opinions. I will leave a link to the video I'm referring to in the description below if you want to check that out. And in his video, titled Checklist Design is Bad and Frustrating, I was watching this video, and for some reason, I kind of resonated with the video in a sort of different way than I think a lot of people do. And I'd like to say right off the bat, right here and now, this is no beef between me and Sai. There's no ill will towards Sai. I adore this man. He is a very big inspiration. He's been a real great help to my homebrew and my channel and all that. So, there's no beef. I just think that we have a little bit of a disagreement on this. Also, if Saibrock, if you're watching this, feel free to leave a comment. Tell me where I may have gotten wrong or where I'm misguided in some things. I'm more than willing to hear it. But here's my opinion on this. He starts the video by stating that checklist design is bad for game design, and that checklist design, I don't want to say hinders, because I don't think those are the words he used very specifically, but the vibe I was kind of getting from the way he was describing it was that it limits your ability as a designer to make interesting things. Because as he says, if you're designing with intent, which is the opposite of a checklist design, you are making new or interesting mechanics, abilities, bonuses, etc. to fit a particular play style. Really, some guy just decided to start his truck. You are building things into the system for the class or for whatever that you are trying to convey a specific type of play style, a play experience, a fantasy of sorts. And predominantly, he focuses on the races and the classes in the video. Particularly, he makes a point that the first thing you can think of is the human race. And I think this is kind of where it started for me. I don't know why, it felt weird to me. He stated that with checklist design versus designing with intention, the hat that humans wear is that they do not wear a hat. They are the generalist race. They aren't particularly spec'd into anything, and they're just generally okay. And the example that he uses in the player's handbook, they either get a +1 bonus to all stats, or if you're using the variant human, they get a +2 to a stat, or +1 to 2 stats, and they get a free feat. And how that's kind of checklist design, like, are they human? Yes. Are they generalist? Yes. There you go. They are humans. But it's strange because in 4th edition, which both me and him agree is a very good game, at least mechanically speaking, humans are generalists. They don't specialize in anything, really. They get the same kind of bonuses that every other race gets. They get normal vision, so they don't get anything special in that regard. The only thing special that they get is that they can choose an extra at-will power, Or they can choose a special feat for their race that whenever they miss with an attack roll, they can just gain a +4. And they gain extra proficiencies and skills. They gain, I think, extra languages, if I'm not mistaken, as I don't have the thing right in front of me. But they are, in essence, a generalist class. They're not good at anything, but they help you be better at a specific class, since you can get an additional free at-will power. That is, I think, considered a very generalist ability. It's not specific to any one class or any one thing, or doesn't benefit you in a specific sense. It is a very generalized ability. I thought that was very strange that humans being a generalist was seen as a checklist design, when 4th edition kind of had the same idea, that humans were generalized. They were kind of the race that you pick when you have a particular idea in mind, but no race really fits it, so you go human to get the extra at-will power, or to get the extra proficiencies. And that's kind of the hat they wear, which is no hat, which is very strange to me. And then he goes on to say that Barbarian, they have to have rage, and with rage, they do more damage. They can tank more hits, and you have to hit people or take damage in order to maintain the rage. And that if your Barbarian on paper does all these things, you have completed your checklist. So while the Barbarian in 5th edition, their rage damage is +2, and they can technically take more damage because they're taking resistance, or they're taking half damage from all bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing damage, and you have to attack or be attacked in order to maintain your rage, and that is checklist design. Which is correct. I am willing to admit that is correct. They are checking off certain abilities and not really caring about how mechanically or how fundamentally it is meant to work, and they just care that it is there. I think me and him agree on that sense, where that form of checklist design is terrible. Where if you just have a very vague set of features, a very vague sense of what the thing that you are designing is meant to do, with no real context as to how you want to design it, rather than just having a list of generalized things and then making the most bare minimum effort to achieve the checklist, is bad design. I will agree. It's a similar thing of, if you have a chore list as a child, and one of the chores is to do the dishes, you can do 3 dishes out of the 20 that are in there and say you technically did the dishes, because you did more than one. That is bad, I agree. But I think checklist design can be a good thing if used correctly. Let me explain. So let's take the human, for example. Let's take the human, since that was the first example he gave. The human being a generalist and being human, those can be good starting points. So I think if you start with a checklist design and then you build from it, that can be good. But if you just build with checklist design and then call it a day once that's completed, then that is bad. So for instance, the idea that I have for humans is that variant human should just be baseline human. I think a generalist human race that by default gets plus 1 to 2 different stats, and then they get no other features, but they get a free feat. I think that is what a human should have, instead of just +1 to all stats. And I think that's fine. Maybe give them extra proficiencies like they did in 4th edition. I'm not entirely sure on the rest of it, but I think that's a good starting point. And as for the barbarian, I think the rage feature is kind of core to the idea of the fantasy of being a barbarian. You are the big man. You have the big muscles. You have the big weapon. And you hit little people with big weapon. And you're strong. And you don't care about anything hitting you or dealing damage to you, because you just go, no. I think the rage is very core to that. And starting with the checklist of, does rage exist in your barbarian? Yes, it does. And then you ask yourself, well, what else does the rage need to do? And you look at your checklist and it says it needs to do damage. If you just go, okay, well, if I do the bare minimum and just give them +2 damage, that increases to maybe like a +6 at later levels. That's damage. It does more damage, right? Okay, I'm done. Then that's bad. But if you ask yourself, okay, so it needs to do more damage, but it needs to do enough damage to kind of allow you to fulfill that fantasy. So what amount of damage feels right? Start with the checklist as a question. I wouldn't say use the checklist as the bare minimum. I'd say use it as part of the question. Rage. Barbarian is supposed to have rage. Okay, well, what does rage mean? What does rage mean to you? And if the answer is the same as, well, what Wizards of the Coast and pretty much any other RPG that has a barbarian that has rage in it calls for, you're likely thinking of the same, it does more damage, it can tank more hits. Which is fine. But then you ask yourself, well, how much damage should it do? How much more tanking ability should it have? Should it be a flat bonus to damage, or should it be a rolled bonus to damage? Should you take a flat amount of resistance damage, or should you take the half damage, quarter damage, what have you? Moreover, what kind of damage should you take more of? Should you take more weapon damage, more generalist damage, all damage? So the point that I'm getting here in this little talk is that I don't think checklist design inherently is bad, but if you adhere to it religiously and you only do the checklist to its barest minimum, then it is bad. But a checklist design for amateur designers can be a good starting point, and then you can build from it. For an example to finish off this video, would be my version of the Barbarian. When I was reworking the Barbarian for 5th edition, I looked at the Barbarian class, and I looked at everybody else's Barbarian classes, and got a general checklist of ideas that fit with the fantasy of playing a Barbarian. The rage needs to be better. It needs to be able to be used more often. You need to have some kind of resource you can spend in order to do unique things to the Barbarian that nobody else has. You, as a Barbarian, need to be tankier without taking away agency from the Dungeon Master, because I attempted to add a sort of provocation ability where the DM was forced to attack you. But I was later told that is a very bad game design, that is where the computer isn't controlling it, but a person is. So I decided to steer away from that. So I ended up making the rage unlimited in pretty much every scenario, but have a duration based on when you are using it. So you can use rage anytime, anywhere, as much as you want, but outside of combat it only lasts 1 minute. But inside of combat it lasts for the entirety of the combat encounter. And during that time you have rage points, and you can spend the rage points to do rage powers, and once you use the rage points, they don't regain until you take a short or long rest, which I am now thinking about changing to a different thing. Similar to that, the fighter. I've given them the Battle Master subclass as baseline features and just changed Battle Master entirely, because that's kind of the checklist that I was going based off of, but I added my own spin onto it. Point being, checklist design isn't bad. It isn't bad by its own existence. It's bad when its existence is the only thing that you're using to gauge your own ability to make something. Is the best way I could describe it. Is if you look at the checklist and you do the checklist to a T and don't do anything else, that is bad. But if you use the checklist as a sort of jumping off point, then it is a very good thing, and you can still design with intention using checklists. You just have to be very careful about it, as to not follow so closely to the checklist that you're no longer designing with intent. But I think that both checklist design and in designing with intent can coexist, but it has to be a balance.